Your NBA Playoffs Preview 2017 brought to you by OffshoreInsiders.com, the place to go throughout the NBA playoffs, including me, Joe Duffy, with my famous bounce-back theory that continues to win. Plus, you will also get the top technical handicap in the business, Stevie Vincent, and the top play, side or total, on every game in which they make a pick from the top sports service plays, the Master Lock Line, the power more than 620 sports services behind each and every play. Now let's get an in-depth playoff preview. We're going to have a series prediction for each game. The Pacers and the Cavaliers. The Cavaliers obviously overwhelming favorites at minus 1,200. Indiana getting back 750. Now, for those of you who are going to try to outsmart yourselves and maybe look for a potential upset, keep in mind that a LeBron James team has never lost more than 2 games in the first round of the playoffs, and I hope you're sitting down for this. They have won 17 straight first-round games. That is, any team led by LeBron James, 17-0 run straight up in first-round games. Now, could the Pacers steal a game? Because every single sportsbook out there, and we're going to tell you about recommended sportsbooks. Actually, the sportsbooks we recommend are on OffshoreInsiders.com. But look, Paul George, I don't expect him to find the fountain of youth for the entire series, but he is more than capable of stealing a game. From a handicapping standpoint, I know the Cavs are struggling defensively, but I wouldn't be worried about that. Teams like the Cavaliers and the San Antonio Spurs, guys where their stars have rings, do have the ability to turn it up in the playoffs. So do not over-handicap some of the recent performance when it comes to totals. Maybe the knee-jerk reaction would be to automatically go against Cleveland and or have the over because they really struggled on defense as of late. Now, Indiana, will it be a big acquisition? They got back Lance Stevenson, the Pacers. He'll certainly give them a little bit of edge in their game, maybe some confidence. And remember, he's kind of been a thorn in LeBron James' side. But yeah, that was really when Stevenson was in his prime defensively. Cleveland is third in offensive efficiency at 110 points per 100 possessions, compared to Indiana just 15th at 106.2. We look for Indiana to steal one game, but it's the Cavs in 5 is our prediction. Milwaukee and Toronto. Toronto is 13-2 straight up in the series. Look, with Toronto, and I know their own announcers like to call him simply Giannis, but Giannis Antetokounmpo and Chris Middleton, they really struggled against the Raptors. And look, Giannis is a spectacular all-around player, fairly much a one-man team. Now, the one thing that does worry us about the Raptors is they finally had some success in the postseason last year, so now they're the old burden of high expectations. I know that a lot of us think of Toronto as a hockey town, and that they are, but man, their home court advantage is crazy. They have a crowd that loves their Raptors in the playoffs, and they have one of the strongest home court advantages in sports. Now, Milwaukee's kind of the dangerous type team. They're the underdogs, but they're a young and talented team. I think they could steal a couple at home, where Toronto's one of those teams that's much better at home than on the road. Also, keep in mind the Raptors with some chemistry problems. They had some late season acquisitions with Ibaka and Tucker, but Kyle Lowry missed a couple games. So their newcomers and their nucleus haven't really played together. Bucks will probably keep some games close. This could be one where Milwaukee wins the series as far as spread-wise is concerned, but we don't look for an upset. Do think that they will steal a couple games. Now, in terms of margin of cover, and again, margin of cover is the same as the points per game margin, except it is based on how much they do or don't cover by, or in the case of over-under, how much they go over or under by. Some people refer to it as the sweat barometer. Cavs, based on that, were the number 2 over team in the NBA this year, going over by an average of 3.6 points per game. Look, and the fact is the Raptors can be, DeRozan can be very, very streaky. Look for Milwaukee to actually steal a couple games, but I like Toronto in 6 games. And, of course, we should have been showing you those odds all along for those of you watching us on our YouTube podcast, our YouTube simulcast, but the Bucks and the Raptors are minus 390. The Bucks are plus 310. So, again, Milwaukee wouldn't be shocked if they pull the upset here, but still, like Toronto in 6. And the flip to that, look, I talked about Toronto as the burden of high expectations. Some might say there's less pressure on them because Toronto was one of those teams that always came up short in the playoffs. And the reverse of that argument is some are going to say that they finally had some success last year, so there's a little bit less pressure on them than there was in previous years, such as last year. Now, where to bet these? We're going to, of course, take a look at Memphis, San Antonio, Portland, Golden State in a moment. Remember, mybookie.ag, 50% sign-up bonus if you use the promo code Duffy, D-U-F-F-Y. So you deposit $1,000, you have $1,500 to spend today, tonight, on your winnings. Promo code Duffy at mybookie.ag, and you certainly want to use that for shopping around. Baseball season is here. For the best money lines, you've got to shop around, and mybookie.ag always pays clients on time, and they are 100% necessary for when shopping for the best line. All right, now, the Grizzlies and the Spurs. The Spurs are minus 1,100. The Grizzlies are plus 700. Now, can we see a possible upset here? Well, the Spurs, they're first in defensive efficiency, allowing 100.9 points per game. Memphis is 6th. I'm sorry, not 100.9 points per game, 100.9 per 100 possessions. Memphis, based on that same efficiency statistic among the leaders, they're 6th at 104.5. Now, here is where the difference between sharps and squares. A lot of squares will say, well, the defensive intensity goes up in the postseason, therefore defense is even more important in the postseason. No. When the defensive intensity goes up, teams that are able to score points, especially in the half court, become more valuable. Points become a commodity. Therefore, the offensive teams become more valuable. Again, why don't you tell me the last NBA team to win a championship where they didn't have a spectacular 1-2 punch? And even when you go back to the old Houston teams where they had a nice three-headed offensive monster. You're not going to win with defense. This is why Dwight Howard will go down as one of those guys who did not get a ring, because when your nucleus of your team is a great defensive player, you're just not going to win in the postseason. But anyway, the point being, the Spurs are much better on offense at 108.8 points per 100 possession to only 104.7 for Memphis. Mike Conley, for Memphis to have any chance, he's got to come up big. Of course, the Gasol against Gasol. Mark for Memphis, Powell for San Antonio. Now, do not underestimate. Look, I think maybe at times, well, I said don't underestimate. I think at times people will talk about, quote unquote, veteran leadership. I think that can be a little bit overrated, but talk about one of the all-time great players. This is the first time in 21 years the Spurs will be in the postseason without Tim Duncan. So yeah, it's tough to replace an enormous talent like that. Of course, the Spurs are very, very deep. In part, of course, Greg Popovich is the guy who invented that, cutting down on the starters of the minutes of the starters. So, but the upside to that is in the playoffs, you got a bunch of guys who have played key minutes. But all that said, the Spurs in 6 are our play. The Spurs in 6 are the play here. Now, the Hawks against the Wizards. The Wizards are minus 230. The Hawks are plus 195. We always say that one of the biggest mistakes people make in postseason handicapping, they really like to weigh what happened in the past 10 or 20 games too much. What happened over an entire season is enormously important. Now, the exceptions would be, of course, if there was a key injury, if a team is without a player that they had early in the season, or maybe they got a key player back, or maybe a one-sided blockbuster trade, then I would take into consideration maybe what happened late in the year over the season as a whole. But my point is, I don't think this is an outlier statistic. Some people may say this is a fluke. 12 teams have made the postseason after starting out 2-8. Only one of those teams has won a playoff series. And the team that qualifies for that would be the Wizards. So the Wizards are a team that you would fade, at least based on that stat. Now, we don't base our predictions based on one statistic, but again, because I've always been a big believer, you handicap a team's entire season. I do not believe that is an outlier statistic whatsoever. But that does not necessarily mean that I'm going with the Hawks, although the Hawks, you can make a strong argument, are a live dog here. Remember, they had some injuries this year, so they're probably better, a little bit better than their record. Millsap and Bazemore missed some key time. John Wall and Bradley Beal, of course, a very difficult backcourt. Can Schroeder match up against John Wall? I don't know if anybody particularly does. Now, remember, these teams met in the playoffs 2 years ago, and Atlanta, they still took Atlanta to 6 games. Now, Wall missed 3 games, actually, and really in 2 of the games he was less than 100%. Washington still pulled off the upset. Now, I know there have been some changes. Horford, of course, is gone, and the Hawks actually have some, if anything, the Hawks were, no, not if anything, the Hawks were without question a better team 2 years ago, while the Wizards, because they're healthy, are a better team now. They're going to get their revenge. Now, the Hawks, by the way, also have a improving Marcin Gortat. Gortat keeps getting better and better. He was always a good role player. Now he's a very good role player. Atlanta does have the big edge on defense, allowing just 103.1 points per 100 possessions to the Wizards' 106.9. But give me a team that can score and get buckets against a more intense defense in the postseason. That's why we like the Wizards here, despite having the inferior defense. Also, for a handicapping standpoint, keep in mind the Wizards are the number 3 over team in the NBA by a margin of 3.3 points per game. We go by the margin, not a mere over-under record, which could be a little deceptive. From a handicapping standpoint, we like the fact they've gone over by an average of 3.3 points per game. At the end of the day, we like Washington in 6. Once again, the Wizards in 6. For your free daily... Oh, and what I should mention, me, Joe Duffy, Grandmaster Handicapper and CEO of OffshoreInsiders.com. I do not like making futures bets, including series bets. Why? Because I like making the game-to-game adjustments. So although these are, without question, my honest picks, and as far as who will win the series, there can be some big in-series adjustments, and I will never marry. This is why I don't like to make futures bets, because I will never marry myself to my futures bets when making game-to-game adjustments. Anyway, for the best picks in the industry, without question, OffshoreInsiders.com.